Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us on this latest episode of Now That's Significant, a market research podcast. This is your host, Michael Howard, the Head of Marketing at InfoTools. Today, we're joined by Greg Stucky, Chief Research Officer of InsightsNow. Thanks for joining us, Greg.
You bet. Glad to be here. Always good to have a good chat.
Awesome. So Greg's focused his career on innovation strategy and the development of new methods, techniques, and research services inspiring innovation. His deep experience in the application of consumer behavior to product innovation has garnered industry attention and awards, with work featured in Harvard Business Review, the LA Times, SMR World, and other industry publications. Greg pioneered Q signals research, an approach where identifying product cues, which motivate specific behaviors, helps develop successful new products and brands. At InsightsNow, he is responsible for the growth of new business initiatives. Greg holds a master's degree in food science and technology with a focus on sensory science from Oregon State University. InsightsNow is an innovation-focused consumer research company who inspire successful innovation for a cleaner, healthier, happier world. They specialize in bringing behavioral metrics and strategies to innovation teams. This ensures the entire team is focused on creating a specific behavior rather than trying to create an innovative product. So, Greg, what's the most significant thing you're going to tell us today?
All right. Well, today, really, I'm excited to highlight one very simple piece of information that a lot of successful innovation teams are using, and that's really the percent of the population that you're going to disrupt and the percent of the population you're going to nudge along with your new innovation launch or message. So understanding how many people are going to get disrupted when you put something on shelf and or introduce people new, so such that they change their behavior, and how many people already have a behavior that matches with what you're going to do, and you're just going to nudge them along to keep doing that more and more and more. So making a plan on how you want to change or leverage that behavior is really critical to really good decision making. And that's really the most significant thing that I wanted to talk about. Using implicit, explicit information such that you can understand how many people are you going to nudge and how many people are you going to disrupt.
Okay, I think we've got quite a full episode then. It's a lot to unpack in that statement. So one of the terms that I used in your intro and that you've brought up as well is innovation teams. So right. Just for clarity's sake, what do you mean by it in the context of the insights world, and how does it relate to what you do at InsightsNow?
Yeah, absolutely. So innovation teams for us, they're very cross-functional. When we think of innovation teams, we think of very cross-functional teams. Going to include marketing people, R&D people, is going to include agency teams. It's going to include partners in the research process. So marketing, consumer, brand, R&D, all of those teams coming together to understand how to launch a brand new product.
Okay, so how does that then apply to InsightsNow?
All right, so at InsightsNow, we really launched InsightsNow because of the focus on innovation teams. And what we were seeing was this really big split or chasm between how companies were running their innovation programs and how we saw that playing out in the lives of real people in the real world, the actual consumers they were targeting. So companies were really focused on metrics that actually had very little to do with a consumer's behavior. So, the concept teams focus on purchase intent. An R&D team focused on liking. How much do they like the product? Does it taste good? Concepts team focused on, are they going to buy the product? Can we get them to buy the product? And if you really take that simple situation, and of course, teams are much more complex than that, but if you take that simple situation, there's a lot of products out there that I go, ooh, that's a pretty cool idea. But when I get to the store shelf, I'm like, that just doesn't seem to match with what I was looking for, or the price is too high, or I look at it and go, that's pretty cool, but hey, this one right next to it looks even better. as well as there's a lot of products out there that taste fantastic, but they just don't fit my lifestyle. They're not relevant to me. They're not targeted to moments where I need them. So you've got a problem. You've got this gap, right, between how products are designed to like create expectations and then how the product's being delivered. So when you focus on the product as an innovation team, when you're focusing on what am I going to deliver, you take your focus off what's most important, which is the consumer. What you really need to put your focus on is how am I going to change consumer behavior with this product? And when you change that as your focus, you start changing what kind of metrics you want, right? So you're going to go from saying, hey, I just want to create a product that really tastes good that people like, to saying something along the lines of, you know what, this product is going to change people's lives so that they become healthier, they become happier, they live stronger, cleaner lives. It's a very different focus, and we believe is one that is an important change that's still needed today in industry.
Yeah, nice. The one thing that I keep coming back to with a similar line of thinking is vanity metrics. So the product focus is how do we look good as a product team, but it doesn't necessarily move the needle. An example, I guess, just quickly is NPS. Like, how likely would you be to recommend us compared to recommend us, or when did you last recommend us? So there's a lot more to NPS than that, but you get my drift.
But that's really the maybe a piece of the puzzle here. And we had a fantastic discussion with some folks on NPS the other day, where contextually, depending on how you ask the actual question before you show them the scale, changes dramatically how they answer that question. So, and then that's true of all research. How you set context for the questions that you're asking, how you set context for the person changes dramatically. So, if would I recommend, this particular product? Well, how do you know what situations in the person's mind where they're making that recommendation or not? Maybe like we were talking about, non-food products. I might recommend this to my brother, but I might not recommend it to my mom, right? I know my mom, she's not going to want this. I'm not even going to bring it up. My brother, going to love it, right? I'm going to throw that in. So understanding context is really, really important. And that's the same thing. So whether it's NPS as a scale or any type of vanity metric, if you will, if you want to manipulate it, you can, and that's a bad place for a researcher to be. But if you want to use it to make smart business decisions, then you've got to step in and ask, okay, well, what am I actually trying to understand about their behavior? And in what situations will they recommend me? What situations will they want? Now you can get to a metric that actually can be useful for you.
Very true. Okay, so happier, healthier consumers living cleaner lives.
Yeah.
It sounds like an awesome vision for the world. Do you have any fun examples of work you've done in this space that you can share?
Well, yeah, I guess there's a lot of great examples of this. And of course, the plant-based clean label movement that's happening in the world, I think, is a good reflection. There's fantastic opportunities all the time for us to put products in front of people that align better with their ideals. But in addition, like a fun example actually is one of my favorite stories. It really comes from a friend of mine who was working at Del Monte at the time. This is way back when they were launching the fruit chillers. So it's juice, frozen, right? Well, if any of the food scientists listening out there, if you freeze juice, you get big giant ice crystals, and people's brains freeze when they eat it. So I had just seen the new fruit chillers commercial that came out, and it says, Mom, she's got kids coming off the soccer field. They're like crazy in the car and just causing chaos. And she hands them all the fruit chillers. They put them in their mouth, and then it pans back to silence. And the kids' heads have these giant ice balls and funny faces. It's a hysterical commercial. And I was teasing the guy. I was like, man, must have been a lot of hard work to make those kids' heads freeze with juice. And he was like, he actually was bummed. He was like, man, I worked 4 years to figure out how to freeze juice so that the ice crystals were really tiny so that they wouldn't get brain freeze. And had I known the agency was going to go ahead and promote brain freeze with this product, I wouldn't have taken 4 years to fix the problem that didn't exist. So the consumer, it's a funny story, but it's it's a good example of, like, if you have a metric over here and you have an agency team building a fantastic commercial, built a fantastic product, but the two didn't align. Like, there were some fundamental pieces. Why did that happen? Well, either the agency didn't know what kind of behavior the company was trying to promote, or the R&D team didn't know what behavior they were going for, right? So either side, there isn't necessarily a right or wrong, but it's a good example of a disconnect between those. So if you want to improve people's lives, make that happier lifestyle, well, what are you trying to do? Is it happier because they don't get brain freeze? Is it happier because they do get brain freeze? And that's funny, right? Both are good, but everybody's got to be on the same page with what behavior you want so that you can get it at the end of the day.
For sure. Yes, that also sounds like some creative teams who are just having a bit of a laugh, or they had this idea in their bottom drawer and they wanted to bring it out at one stage.
Could be. Yeah, we laughed because, like, Sour Patch Kids were all the rage about the same time, and we were laughing how that product wasn't about the flavor. You could probably make it any flavor you wanted, is just to see that terrible reaction, that, oh man, frozen face reaction, which is great if that's what you're going for.
Yeah.
Boom, right?
So thinking back to the genesis of InsightsNow, how did you discover what would be better at predicting behavior?
That's very good. So really, we started with behavioral science as a general framework, and there's a ton of great books on psychology, behavioral science, behavioral economics, wonderful programs at universities teaching behavior, sociology, all, et cetera, so forth. All of them are missing one component piece, and that's innovation, right? It's all about understanding how people make decisions, make choices, but it's stripped of the idea of, I'm going to build a new, say, food or beverage that is going to be an innovative product on the market. So no one was really putting together all that information that could help you organize all the knowledge into metrics that would help you understand innovation streams. So what we did is, beginning of InsightsNow, is we started building simple frameworks. How do people make choices, and what types of subconscious perceptions changed our choices? And that led us to developing a framework where you could trace the context and the motivations and through to the emotions that a person would have and what types of choices you would make. From there, we moved on to understanding, well, how does that knit together from the vantage point of a person's emotional profile, and how do you break down emotions and understand what kinds of emotions matter? So we built what we call the emotions insights wheel. We also then took information and said, well, it's good to understand behavior, but you also have to be able to target people. You have to be able to bring all this nuanced information together. So we put together the behavior pyramid, which organizes the knowledge. And the great thing about organizing knowledge is you can learn what you have and what you don't have. So how to better impact people and what type of information you need to go get. And that's going to include things like demographics, people's time styles, ideals, benefits, belief systems, right? Things that we ought to do, ought not to do. And then layered on top of that, people's contexts, what's motivating them in the context. Above that, like, what's their then emotional play, and ultimately resulting in what kind of behaviors do they have. So this really rich set of frameworks, as we started building them, started helping us organize information and make sure that as we're working with innovation teams and somebody said something like, well, I need to know purchase intent, we could say, here's where it sits, and let's talk about what information you might need around that in order to get at the behavior that you're really looking for. Those frameworks also helped us create conversations that help people get past those, as you call them, the kind of the pretty metrics, right? And the metrics they're used to. So, like, we called it going beyond liking, right? It's more than liking, it's all this other information. So rather than like reinventing or re-engineering engineering all the information, we're just really helping streamline and organize the information so that you could focus on what you need in order to see what kind of impact you're going to have on people's lives. So it all started with building good frameworks.
Yeah, sure. Is there any, I mean, making a framework is amazing and people love them. Putting them into reality typically gets a little harder. So like what experience or roadblocks have you had in trying to deliver those to
Yeah,
folks?
yeah. I always remember one of my colleagues said frameworks are like toothbrushes. Everybody has one and nobody wants to use anybody else's. But yeah, frameworks actually are, I mean, they are really nice because they are really helpful for organizing them. The most important thing to remember about frameworks is they're not methods or techniques in and of themselves. What they are is they're teaching and learning tools. So they're foundational education that help you organize how to think. So when you're faced with a problem, when you're faced with understanding innovation, when you're looking at, let's say, a piece of consumer research where there's all these stories that consumers are telling you, it helps you pick elements and say, that piece is what's motivating them in that context to do X, right? Without a framework, you might not see any of those patterns. You might just see a bunch of words, and one time you interpret it one way and another time you interpret it a different way. So it creates consistency in focus.
Right. Very cool. Are there any frameworks then you find useful for innovation teams?
Yeah, so well, I mean, lots of frameworks are useful, of course, but I would say, like most recently, we just re-released the Emotions Insights Wheel, because one of the things that is definitely important right now is emotional branding. A lot of people are really focusing on how do you connect the emotions that a person has with the jobs that the product is supposed to do, and what kind of responses you create. So that one's certainly very, very valuable for innovation teams. And we spend a lot of time teaching how to understand what emotion are people really talking about, because the science of emotional words is really different than the words consumers use to describe how they're feeling and how they're reacting to things. So the value of that is basically training you to listen. Oh, if they said this, they probably that relates to this, and different groups may talk about it differently, but it all relates back. We also have frameworks on destinations and journeys. That's another part of the subconscious cueing realm, where you're looking for things that on-ramp people to brands and off-ramp people from brands. So what are some of those experiential elements that make people stop being repeat users or never become repeat users, versus what are the things that are going to get them to come in and try to begin with? So understanding where they're at in a consumer journey and what you might be able to do to influence them at each step of that journey is a really important piece of framework. And again, it's understanding how those journeys go and what type of information is more influential at what stage. Those frameworks help people then think more coherently about, like, if I'm doing message testing, what is this message supposed to do? Is it supposed to stop you in your tracks and get you to just put a brand on the list, consider it? Or maybe just the category, or is it to actually make you buy at shelf? Those are two different parts of the journey, and the message for one part might be different than the message for another part. We also have a habit flywheel, which is specific to CPG product innovation. So there certainly, you can go out and a lot of the different habit frameworks out there. What we built was specific to helping people who are in product innovation understand that how that flow goes. One of the things we see a lot is that the innovation teams forget to connect the reward that a person gets after using a product back to whatever triggered them to use it to begin with, right? So they think of it linearly instead of as a circle. That framework also helps companies think through, well, where in a person's habits can I disrupt them? So if you're the newcomer, if you're a plant-based company trying to disrupt, people who eat bacon every morning for breakfast, how do you do that, right? Where in that journey, where in their set of habits that they have built up, can you disrupt them. That makes the problem solving of that introduction a lot easier when you can start saying, oh, should we disrupt them here or here or here or here or here? What do we want to target? Let's see. I think that the other framework that is really useful, and we talked about this because, at the very beginning, talking about implicit and explicit, is modes of thinking. And modes of thinking framework is where we're breaking apart the way the brain thinks, if you will. And again, this is an education tool where most people think of system 1, system 2, right? Count them on system 1, that's implicit thinking, it's fast. System 2, that's explicit thinking, that's slower. Most people are pretty familiar with both of those. We added across the top of that system 3 thinking, which is prospective thinking. That's like thinking about the future. Most people would call that part of system 2, right? If you go back to the original science, it's still an explicit metric. The reason we're breaking it apart, though, is because for innovators, when you put a consumer in a mindset where you need them to think about something that doesn't exist today, that's a really different mindset and a really different way of considering thought, and a really different way that a person is going to give you information and make decisions than if you've put them in a mindset where they're thinking explicitly about what they just experienced. So things that they're already experiencing is a very different way the brain thinks creatively than about things that don't yet exist. So if you're in that white space identification creative mode and you want to get to that space where it's more perspective thinking, then this framework was designed to make you say, oh, you're right, those are really different pieces of the puzzle. And the final part of that framework is really getting people to understand, well, what does that mean for behavior? So I know system 1 and system 2, but what does that really mean? Well, what it really means is system 1, if you're connecting with a person through system 1 implicit thinking, you're nudging the behavior that they are, the beliefs they already have, the behaviors they're already doing, you're just nudging those along. Whereas if you're connecting with their system 2, you have a chance to disrupt them. And that's really, from a behavior standpoint and from an innovation team standpoint, where it all becomes really, really cool. And you can really start saying, okay, wait, what am I trying to do with people? Am I going to disrupt a portion of the population, get them to try my product, consider my product? Am I going to convince them to stop doing something they've been doing for years on end? All of those questions are really answered only if you're asking yourself or collecting data that is where you can break apart. Was their reaction an implicit one or an explicit one?
Yeah, sure. Have you noticed any difference between these frameworks in practice for products versus services?
Well, certainly a little bit. So like, for instance, when we talk about the habit flywheel a lot, when you talk about the service side of the equation, there's no product selection, like service selection operates sometimes independent of like product selection. So you can imagine if I am at the grocery store, I have tons and tons and tons of products all available, and my brain is filtering down to a subset, and then I'm picking from that subset. If it's a service oriented, I might not approach that problem that same way. So your service selection process could be very different. So for instance, when we were applying this to smartphones, and think of the service being your telephone service. So if you are, if you're an iPhone user versus a Samsung user, just knowing that about a person may change what services they're more likely to even put in their consideration set. Or maybe you're an AT&T, aficionado versus T-Mobile, right, lover. Those two will change maybe what phone you end up buying, right? So services, when it comes to services, services are often connected to multiple products. And so you have to start thinking a little bit more expansively, if you will, or like think about more iterations or influencing points of influence along the habit flywheel.
I guess that's where you're talking about context. That context comes in.
100%. Yeah,
Cool.
and context is we haven't really talked about that yet, but it should go probably on the record of saying that if you're doing anything related to habits and you're not putting context into play, or if you're trying to do anything related to behavior and you're not understanding context or setting context for people or bringing that context into your research, then you're not you actually have so much noise in your data, you might not be getting very good data to begin with.
Sure.
Context is essentially king when it comes to understanding and creating behaviors.
So I guess context would be your second most significant thing that you're going to talk
Probably
about
the most
today.
significant thing. Yeah. So I guess for everybody out there that isn't already incorporating context, that's more important than understanding nudge and disrupt, because you can't nudge or disrupt people unless you're in context.
No, true. Okay. So just on the nudge and disrupt, do you take a different approach when someone just wants to nudge versus disrupt, or are you open to having both?
Yeah, so that's actually a really good question. So the reality is you're very rarely going to be bringing out a product where you're disrupting like it's only a disruption. It's so new to the world that it disrupts everybody, right? The vast majority of new products coming out are actually designed to disrupt some people and nudge others, right? So your most successful products are going to lay in that space where you're trying to align yourself with a behavior that already exists for a good group of people so that you can get pretty quick adoption, and then disrupt other people so that you get the word of mouth and excitement that comes with it. So if you're a new product introducing to the market, you always want to have some segment of your population that you're disrupting. If you're the incumbent, if I'm the billion-dollar brand and all I'm doing is improving my message or adding a new commercial to my set, if I disrupt people, that's bad, actually. I want to find the message that's going to nudge the vast majority of people, disrupt the fewest people possible, because I want those ingrained habits to stay true.
Oh, cool. So I guess that's a good segue into just digging into this implicit explicit test a little more. What makes it unique with what you're doing at?
Yeah, you bet. So implicit and explicit. So things like the implicit association test and other types of techniques for getting at implicit versus explicit reactions of people have been around for ages and ages. And we use them for a long period of time. And up until about 4 years ago, we were using more traditional approaches. And really one of the things that was a problem in industry was that information was hard to apply, right? It's kind of like, it's a scientific number. You'll look at it and you go, I have this value and I don't know if that value is really a good value. Do I have a cutoff? Should I have a benchmark? How can I really leverage that number? And really, they're just not that helpful. The traditional metrics aren't really that helpful. For us, like for me personally, the real aha moment in implicit and explicit research came when I was at a conference. I was listening to Bank of America, and they're talking about how they're working with the ATMs, and they were working on improving their AI for processing the millions and millions of checks that they're doing through machines. And the innovation leader who was given the talk said, yeah, I came to my team and I told them, hey, our job is to figure out the problem of processing millions of checks a day and making sure that we get millions and millions of checks a day processed as quickly as we can. And one of his team members spoke up and he raised his hand. He says, actually, no, that's not our problem at all. And he was kind of taken back because it was like, yeah, I'm new to the team. I'm telling you what the problem is. He goes, actually, our problem is you have to figure out how to process one check perfectly. And that's really when it hit me. I was like, whoa, that's the problem with implicit testing out there. Implicit testing and like the implicit association test is designed to look at groups. It's designed to look at generalized patterns across a group of people. That's not really the innovation problem we're facing. What we really need to figure out is for that one specific person, are they going to get disrupted or are they going to get nudged? And if we can understand for each and every individual what's going to happen to them and what their resulting behavior will be, then now we have a very clear, very operational group of data to work with. Because I can go out and say, hey, 47% of the people who see this new message, it's just going to nudge their current behavior along. It's going to work well. You're going to continue to get good enhanced repeat purchase. For 12%, they're going to get disrupted in a good way. They're going to be thinking this is a great opportunity. It's going to make them rethink about the brand, and they're going to go, wow, this is even better than I thought, and they're going to move. For 2%, they're going to get disrupted, and it's going to be bad for you. You're actually going to lose them, and this is why, right? And are you willing to give up that 2% for the gain that you get? Those kinds of conversations were not possible at all with a traditional implicit explicit test. So when we redesigned it so that we could calibrate each specific person in the study and see exactly whether they were going to get disrupted, if they were going to get nudged, and whether that was going to be a positive or a negative. Once we understood that we can break those people down to those things, then everything changed, because now knowing those percentages, it was really straightforward to align, like, what are we going to do that cues behavior, and what are we going to do that disrupts a behavior? And then I can easily see that impact on the market.
Yeah, okay. Let's just dig into the percentages, because it's quite a fascinating point. Like, why is knowing it so vital? How does it help?
Right. Good question. So knowing the percentages really helps you understand whether you're going to, keep people doing a behavior they're doing currently and maybe do it more frequently, right? So if you're that top brand in the category, people are using your brand habitually. You don't want to introduce something that maybe all of a sudden makes them go, oh, I wonder what other flavors of orange soda are on the market. And they start looking around, and then they may make a different decision at that point in time, because there may be other influencers, or they may just be curious and want to try. So if you're going out with a new message, you want to make sure that that message is a wonderful alignment with your brand and your benefits and the existing behaviors. So it has to match extremely well. Disrupting people in that moment is bad. Whereas if you're the newcomer to the category and you want to get people to stop and take notice, then that's the message you really want to take out, because you want people to see the message on the shelf and go, whoa, hadn't ever considered that before. I'm going to try this instead, right? And that's what you're really hoping to do is understand with these metrics, what percentage of people am I going to move in to a more rational, more considered mindset. And then once you know that they're in that mindset, that's where you have the chance to now maybe influence their behavior in ways they hadn't had before.
Very cool. So for the curious or the scientists out there, do you have more details on the science behind this implicit explicit test?
Absolutely. So we actually wrote an ebook on it. We actually wrote an ebook. We started with one that just looks at the neuro testing space in general. So it looks at different types of neuro techniques, implicit attributes, whether they're target response techniques or different types of techniques, how those relate and how those are valued in different aspects of research. And then within that, showing where the implicit explicit test really sits and in what ways you can use that information. So certainly we've got an ebook. It goes in a lot more details. We also have databases. So for people who are especially in the food industry, supplements industry, we have databases where we've gone out and gathered a lot of implicit reactions. So if a person sees a particular ingredient on a label, what benefit do they think they're going to get out of it? So for instance, if I say calcium, chances are you're going to say healthy bones, right? If I say vitamin A, you're going to probably say eyesight, right? Those are implicit things that we already know. They're like pretty common for people that are in the food industry or in nutrition. Maybe not common for everybody, but probably most listeners hear that. Whereas, if I say another ingredient that is maybe less well known to somebody, riboflavin. Well, what do you think you're going to get as a benefit out of that? And maybe in different parts of the country or in different areas or in different products, it's different values. So understanding like how to connect those dots. So we've got a lot of data on perception of how clean is a specific ingredient, as well as what kind of benefits do you get out of different ingredients. And then same thing for the supplements space as well. So there's a lot of good resources out there to see not just how does the test work and how does it function and how's it set up, but also then here's some data that you can use to see how it might connect.
It'd also be quite interesting just to have a look at how how simplistic data has changed over the last little while as well.
Interesting.
So,
yeah. We're certainly starting to see some changes, like in as people get more and more educated. Which one we were talking about ashwagandha the other day, right? It's for a sleep aid, right? Is for people who've been it, but very, very minor group of people are, even aware of it, right? It sounds like some made up word to half the people who see it. But as soon as you've seen it and you know its context, then it's stuck in your brain because it's such a creative word. And if you're using it in the supplement space, it's becoming more and more and more and more well known. And, several years from now, I wouldn't be surprised if it was heavily, heavily associated implicitly. Right now, it's only a subset of people who even have that connection.
Yeah, cool. I mean, the whole thought you raised it before of bacon every day for breakfast.
Yeah.
That's a young person's thing, isn't it? I think the older you get, imagine have your bacon on the weekend and then have your tofurkey and the rest of the
Yes,
time.
right. That's right. Yeah, maybe and it depends on if you're talking, New Zealand bacon versus American bacon. Those two things are not the same. Yeah,
We'll have to do some testing.
that's right. That's right. You probably if you grew up in New Zealand, you'd be very unhappy with American bacon and vice versa.
True.
What did you give me?
So what are some examples then of the applications of some of the work that you've been doing?
Sure. So, well, you just mentioned tofurkey. Let me bump off that one. So we did some packaging research for them. So this is a case study. If you want to read more about it, we've got a cool webinar that we did on it as well. But tofurkey was working with saying, hey, let's look at the type of packaging we're using. Now, if anybody knows much about tofurkey, they are, a company that espouses everything sustainable, natural, etc. Right? So very health and wellness focused company. And one of the things they were considering was different types of packaging. Right now, it's it's in a plastic sleeve inside a cardboard box. And they were saying, well, that we look the same as everybody else on the shelf. What other options are out there? Could we go to something that maybe makes it look more like what you see in the real meat section? Maybe a plastic tub, or maybe a bubble wrap or something else. And so one of the things that they were concerned about was not just, hey, which of these packages do people like the best, right? That would be an old school approach. It would be, well, when they see these packages, what do they believe? If they suddenly see tofurkey in a plastic container, are they going to get concerned that we've thrown away our brand equity, right? What do they think about the product inside? Do they still believe and have faith that it's going to be plant-based product inside? Or does it improve their perception that maybe this actually does taste like real meat now, right? So can we improve that perception by putting it in different packaging? So the implicit explicit test is what we use to help them show people different package styles, in the fully branded scenario and in different contexts, in the context of just other plant-based, in the context of plant and analog meats. So understanding all of those contextual settings as well as different package settings and see what happens to implicit reactions against this core brand values. And for like instance, in that particular case, what we saw was if you put it in a thin plastic tray with a thin film over it, it kept that perception. Yeah, they're doing good for the environment because it's less packaging total, because before it was package plus cardboard. Now it's just the plastic piece. And in that scenario, they also got a bump in, hey, that looks like real meat. So, and then when they put that further within the context of other meat products, it enhanced it even more. So now they had the good evidence to say, hey, to a retailer, hey, if you stock this against the other lunch meats instead of on this random category by itself, you're actually going to get better pickup. You're going to, people are not going to be misled. They're going to be picking it up. They're going to feel more confident. They're going to believe that it tastes good because it looks more like the real meats around them. Yeah, so that's one really cool example, I think. And I think it's one where people probably don't apply it as much as they should, right? Within any time you have a small packaging change, it can have a radical impact that if you just showed people the package, they might not think about, right? Because there's so many little elements that go along with the packaging that you may not expressly want to talk about one specific aspect of a design.
Just nudging.
So, yeah, just nudging, right? Yeah. A little bit of those subconscious cues. Let's see. Another example would be like in message testing. We talked a lot about this idea of are you going to nudge people? Are you going to disrupt people? So we worked with Scotch brand on the new packaging wrap that they just released. So it's for like instead of bubble wrap, you would bring out this nice, highly recyclable cardboard wrap that you could just peel apart, roll up, boom, you're done. Improves ease of use and other things. Well, there's a million things you could say about that particular type of value proposition for consumers. So the question is, which ones are going to work? And how many people are you willing to disrupt, right? Because you're 3M, you still have other brands and products on the market, right? Yeah. So how many people are you going to disrupt versus how many people are you going to say, yeah, that fits into my current routine perfectly, I want to nudge along. And when you're going out with launches like that, the value there is you get to say multiple things. You don't just have to have one claim, right? You can tell a whole story of claims. So in that particular scenario, being able to look at which claims were more for the nudge and which were more for the disrupt, then the PR agency and the messaging agency could say, okay, we need to weave together these 4 and 5 statements so that they come across so we're both nudging and disrupting different people, but it's still one cohesive positioning statement that goes out to consumers. And that kind of an approach allows you to do the both and. I know I'm going to be able to, disrupt people. And if I really want to put a disruptive story out, I need to push this side of the message. If I really want to push the habit side, right? If I'm looking about the process, making your life easy, making it simple, that's what people want in their packaging. I'm going to push this side of the coin. Very cool. I think that's a really cool one. That one was really nice, and it just made me want to wrap everything in at Christmas time. I'm like, argh.
But what about does it still do the popping?
Does not do that, but there are some other kinesthetics that it has that would replace that. And that's it's another good piece of it, right? You have to think about the whole behavioral side of it. So while it doesn't do the pop, 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 pop on the backside, if you go and you look up their new cushion wrap, you're going to see that there's this really cool expanding design to it. That's just fun. And it has that same thing, a little bit of sense of play with a product that works.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. So if I can quickly recap, or attempt to anyway, Greg, what we've talked about, the key driver that successful innovation teams use for launching and iterating products and services that resonate with the market ultimately comes down to focusing on the behavior that they're wanting to either nudge or disrupt. and then getting that balance between those two, depending on what you're trying to achieve, right?
Exactly.
And I can't go amiss to say that context is absolutely
That's
vital in this particular behavior as well. So you highlighted some of the frameworks that you use to better predict behavior and help bring about better understanding to their clients of their customers. We looked at what makes InsightNow's implicit, explicit testing approach unique and the importance of knowing the percentages of how many people are either nudged or disrupted. We looked at the science behind the innovation approach that you use, specifically this implicit explicit test. And then we also looked at some of the applications, so Scott and Tofurky, how they use the implicit explicit test, etc. And amazing stuff that you're doing, and I'll definitely be keeping an eye on some of the things
Absolutely
that you're doing.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks for having me. If if people are interested, certainly just reach out. We love advancing the industry. We believe that if everybody gets smarter, the industry is going to, be all that much better, and consumers' lives are going to be changed because of it. So, we're all about education. We've got tons and tons of material. We have an innovation center on our website where all this content that we've been publishing in this space, behavior framework, et cetera, it's all there, and there's a ton of great stuff, a ton of great things to learn. So it doesn't cost anything to jump in there and get yourself smarter.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for joining us on the episode today.
You bet. I appreciate you having me.
Cool. And I think we might have to have you back to talk about context.
Probably a good idea. Absolutely.
Awesome. So for the listeners out there, if you've liked what you've heard today, please subscribe to the podcast. Feel free to share it with others or even leave a review as well. And if you've liked what Greg and the team at InsightsNow are up to, feel free to check them out as well. Thanks very much for listening to Now That's Significant.